I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I am not brave. I have never been brave. I have spent 11 years sitting in a dark room with a headset on, talking strangers through the worst moments of their lives, while I ate cold pizza and watched a blinking cursor. I have talked a mother through infant CPR. I have stayed on the line while a woman hid in a closet from her husband. I have listened to a 17-year-old boy take his last breath after a car wrapped around a telephone pole on Route 9. I have done all of that without ever once being in the room. That is what I am. I am the voice that stays calm while everything falls apart. And then I clock out, and I drive home, and I sit in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Covington, Kentucky, and I heat up leftover Chinese food, and I do not think about any of it. That is the deal. That is how the job works. You compartmentalize, or you drown. My name is Marcus Bewley. I was 41 years old on the night Angie Reeves called my personal cell phone at 2:47 in the morning and told me to drive. Angie and I had worked the same overnight rotation at the Kenton County 911 Center for 6 years. She was the shift supervisor, sharp, unflappable, the kind of woman who could handle 4 critical calls stacked simultaneously and still remember to remind you that your parking validation was expiring. We were not friends exactly. We were something closer than friends, and less than friends at the same time. The way you become with people you sit beside in the dark for 8 hours while the city bleeds into your ears. She knew I had a bad knee. I knew her oldest son had dropped out of Center College. We had never once gotten coffee outside the building. So when my phone lit up with her name at 2:47 a.m. on my night off, I knew something was wrong. I answered with my eyes still closed. Angie, Marcus, listen to me. Do not talk. Do not ask questions. Get in your car. Drive south. Right now. Do not stop for gas. Fill up at the first station you see outside the city, and then do not stop again. Do you understand me? I sat up. The room was dark. The laundromat below me was humming its usual midnight cycle. What are you talking about? I am not calling you as your supervisor. I am calling you as someone who has sat next to you for 6 years. Something is happening. The board lit up 20 minutes ago and it has not stopped. I have 37 calls holding right now. I have never seen 37 calls holding. Marcus, the calls are all the same. They are all the same call. People are being attacked. Not robberies, not domestics, something else. Dispatch in Cincinnati went dark 4 minutes ago. Their system just dropped. I called their backup line and no one answered. I have units responding to a scene on Madison Avenue, and 2 of them stopped transmitting mid-sentence. I am watching the board right now and there are calls coming from inside the firehouse on Scott Street. Inside the firehouse. My feet were on the cold floor. I was standing. I do not remember deciding to stand. Angie, slow down. I will not slow down. I have maybe 10 minutes before someone above me locks this building down, or the phones go dead, or whatever is happening out there reaches this room. I am calling you because you are off tonight, and you are home, and you have a car, and you can leave. I cannot leave. I have 6 operators in this room, and I am their supervisor, and I will not leave them. But you can. So drive. Drive south. Get out of the metro. Get away from any city. Go now. What about you? The pause was 3 seconds long. In my profession, 3 seconds of dead air is an eternity. It is the silence that follows a question nobody wants to answer. I already called my son. He is not picking up. The line went dead. I stood there in my boxers in the dark, holding a phone that had just delivered the most terrifying 60 seconds of my life from the most level-headed person I had ever known. The laundromat hummed. A car passed outside, headlights dragging across the ceiling. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 5 minutes ago. I grabbed my pants off the chair. I did not pack a bag. I picked up my keys, my wallet, my phone, and a half-full bottle of water from the counter. I walked downstairs and got in my car. It was 2:51 a.m. The thing about being a dispatcher is that you develop an internal clock for emergencies. You learn the rhythm. Something happens. People panic. First responders arrive. The panic contracts. There is a window, usually 45 minutes to an hour, where a crisis is at its most chaotic, and then systems take over, and things start to stabilize. I had heard that rhythm 10,000 times. It was the tempo of my entire adult life. What Angie described had no rhythm. It was all peak. No contraction. No stabilization. Just a board filling up and staying full. That is what made my hands shake as I turned the key in the ignition. Not the content of what she said. The shape of it. I pulled out of the lot behind the laundromat and turned south on Madison Avenue. Covington was quiet. It was a Tuesday, technically a Wednesday now, and the streets had that dead midweek emptiness. A traffic light cycled through its colors for no one. A cat sat on a dumpster and watched me pass. I turned onto the ramp for I-75 South and pressed the accelerator harder than the speed limit invited. The highway was sparse. A few semis, a couple of late-night sedans, nothing unusual. I kept checking my mirrors like the sky was going to crack open behind me. It did not. The road was just a road. Kentucky unrolled flat and dark on either side. I called Angie back. Straight to voicemail. I called twice more. Same result. I called the non-emergency line at the center. Busy. I called the administrative office. No answer. I tried the direct desk number for Station 2, the one I sat at every shift. It rang 11 times and nobody picked up. At 3:15 a.m., I pulled into a speedway station just south of Walton. The fluorescent lights buzzed over the pumps. A woman in scrubs was filling up a minivan on the other side of the island. A kid, maybe 19, sat inside the booth scrolling his phone, with the glazed look of someone 5 hours into a nothing shift. I filled my tank. I went inside and bought 2 bottles of water, a bag of trail mix, and a prepaid phone charger. The kid did not look up. The woman in scrubs drove away. I sat in my car in the speedway lot and tried to think. The rational part of my brain, the part that had been trained to triage information calmly, was telling me that I was overreacting. That Angie had been in the middle of a high-volume shift, and her nerves had spiked, and she had called me in a moment of panic that she would probably be embarrassed about by morning. People have bad shifts. Systems glitch. Cincinnati's dispatch network was notoriously underfunded. But the other part of my brain, the part that had listened to 11 years of human catastrophe in real time, knew what genuine fear sounded like. I had heard it from strangers 1,000 times. I had never heard it from Angie Reeves. I pulled back onto I-75 and kept driving south. At 3:40 a.m., I turned on the AM radio. I scanned through static and farm reports and overnight syndication until I landed on 700 WLW out of Cincinnati. The host was mid-sentence. Something about unusual emergency activity in the tri-state area. Reports of a large-scale incident in downtown Cincinnati. Authorities urging residents to stay indoors. His voice had that measured broadcast cadence, but underneath it, there was a thinness, a careful selection of words that told me he was reading something he did not fully understand. I passed a sign that said Lexington was 53 miles ahead. At 3:58 a.m., the broadcast cut out. Not to commercial, not to static. The signal simply ended, replaced by the flat, continuous tone of dead air. I scanned the dial. 3 other stations were gone. 2 more were playing automated loops, pre-recorded weather forecasts cycling with no human interruption. I pressed the gas until the speedometer needle touched 90. The highway was getting emptier. The semis had thinned out. The sedans were gone. I was driving through a corridor of nothing, just asphalt and guardrails, and the occasional glow of an overpass lamp, and the growing understanding that whatever Angie had heard on her board was not a glitch and was not a bad shift. I did not know what it was yet, but I was beginning to understand that she had given me something no one else on those 37 holding calls received. Time. I hit Lexington at 4:30 a.m., and the city was awake in ways it should not have been. Not fully, not daylight busy, but there were too many headlights for a Wednesday pre-dawn. Clusters of cars at gas stations, a Walmart parking lot with dozens of vehicles and people loading trunks, a police cruiser flying north on the opposite side of the highway with its lights on and no siren, which in my experience means the officer does not want to attract attention. I watched it disappear in my rear view and felt my stomach fold. I needed a plan. I did not have a plan. I had a half tank of gas, 4 bottles of water, trail mix, and a vague directive to drive south. I had no family in Kentucky outside of Covington. My parents were dead. My sister lived in Portland, Oregon, which might as well have been the moon. I had no survival training, no weapon, no supplies, and no clear destination. I had spent my entire career telling other people what to do in emergencies, and now I was discovering that the voice in the headset does not know a single useful thing when the headset comes off. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I did not recognize. Marcus. This is Darla Eckstein from Third Shift. Angie told me to text you if she couldn't call. The center is locked down. National Guard showed up 20 minutes ago and sealed the building. They are using our system to coordinate something, but they won't tell us what. Angie is still here. She is okay. She told me to tell you to keep going and do not come back to the city. She said the river bridges are already closed. Please be safe. I pulled over on the shoulder and read it 3 times. National Guard, sealed building, river bridges closed. I typed a reply. Tell Angie thank you. Tell her I'm heading south on 75. Tell her to get out if she can, and hit send. The message sat on sending for 40 seconds before it went through. I got back on the highway. The traffic was picking up now. All of it southbound. Nobody was heading north. That is a detail that burns itself into your brain when an entire half of a divided highway is empty. It means everyone has made the same calculation at the same time, and they are all running from the same direction. At 5:10 a.m., I passed a rest stop near Richmond. The parking lot was full. People were standing outside their cars talking to each other, some of them pointing at their phones. A woman sat on the curb with a toddler on her lap, both of them wrapped in a blanket. A man in a trucker cap was pacing near the vending machines, shouting into a phone. Nobody looked injured. Nobody looked panicked, exactly. They looked like people waiting for an explanation that was not going to come. I did not stop. Angie had said, do not stop. At 5:25 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID said Kenton County 911, admin. I answered immediately. It was not Angie. It was not Darla. It was a man's voice I did not recognize. Deep, flat, official. Is this Marcus Bewley? Yes. Mr. Bewley, you are an employee of Kenton County Emergency Communications, correct? I am. Who is this? This is Sergeant Dolan, with the Kentucky National Guard. Your facility has been designated a critical communications node. All dispatchers are being recalled to duty, effective immediately. We need you to return to the center. I looked at the empty northbound lanes beside me. I thought about the bridges being closed. I thought about the sound in Angie's voice. The bridges are closed, I said. I can't get back across the river. Where are you currently? Every instinct in my body, the same instinct that had been sharpened by 11 years of listening to people lie, people omit, people try to control narratives under duress, told me not to answer that question. I'm south of Lexington, I said, which was true but useless. Mr. Bewley, this is a mandatory recall. Failure to comply. I hung up. My hands were trembling. I had never hung up on an authority figure in my life. I had spent my entire career being the authority figure people hung up on. But something in that sergeant's voice, the rehearsed flatness of it, the complete absence of urgency, told me that returning to Covington was not about saving the communication system. It was about plugging warm bodies into chairs in a building the guard had already commandeered. I turned my phone off and kept driving. The guilt arrived at 6:15 a.m., right around the time the sun broke over the hills east of Berea, and the highway filled with golden light that made everything look safe and dishonest. I had been a dispatcher for 11 years. In that time, I had talked people through stabbings, car accidents, house fires, cardiac arrests, overdoses, drownings, and one incident involving a man trapped under a tractor for 6 hours. In every single one of those calls, I was the calm center. I was the person who stayed. The whole identity of the job is that you do not leave. You do not hang up. You do not abandon the caller. You sit in that chair, and you absorb whatever horror comes through the line, and you hold it together, because someone on the other end needs you to. And now, I was driving south at 85 miles per hour, putting distance between myself and every person I had ever been trained to help. I told myself it was rational. I told myself Angie had given me this chance specifically so I would use it. I told myself that one dispatcher in a sealed building was not going to change whatever was happening in Cincinnati and northern Kentucky. All of that was true. None of it touched the feeling. The feeling was simple. I was the voice that stays on the line. And I had hung up. At 6:40 a.m., I stopped at a gas station near Mount Vernon. The attendant, a heavy man in his 60s, with a gray beard and a University of Kentucky hat, was standing outside watching traffic. He looked at me the way you look at the 10th person in a row who has pulled in with out-of-state plates and a hollow expression. "Coming from up north?" he asked. "Covington. What's happening up there? Been getting nothing but people like you for the last hour. Nobody wants to say what it is." I did not know what to tell him. I did not fully know what it was myself. "Something bad in Cincinnati," I said. "They closed the bridges." He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they are filing information into a category they hoped they would never use. "My daughter lives in Florence. Can't get her on the phone." I did not say anything to that, because there was nothing to say. Florence was 6 miles south of Covington. If the bridges were closed, Florence was already inside whatever perimeter the guard had drawn. I filled up my tank, bought a paper map of Kentucky and Tennessee from a spinning rack inside, and used the restroom. When I came out, the man was still standing there, but now he was looking at his phone, with the expression of someone reading something they cannot metabolize. "Hey," he said to me as I reached my car. "You seen this?" He held out his phone. On the screen was a shaky cell phone video. Someone had posted it to Twitter, or whatever remained of Twitter, filmed from what looked like a parking garage in downtown Cincinnati. The footage was dark, pre-dawn, shot from above. Below, on the street, there were people running. Not jogging, not hurrying. Full dead sprints. The kind of running where form breaks down, and the body is just a panicked machine. Behind them, and this is where my chest locked up, were other figures, moving at a pace that should not have been possible for human legs. They were not running the way the fleeing people were running. Their movement was wrong, spastic, overcorrected, like every muscle was firing at maximum without any coordination from the brain. One of them caught a woman near a bus stop. The video cut out. "What the hell is that?" the man said. "I don't know," I lied. I did know. I did not know the specifics, the biology, the terminology, the official classification that would come later. But I knew. 11 years of listening to emergencies had taught me to recognize the sound of something that is not going to stabilize. And now I had seen the visual equivalent. I got in my car, and I left that man standing in his parking lot with his phone and his daughter in Florence and his quiet, crumbling world. And I drove away, and I added him to the list of people I did not help. The list was getting long. It was only 7 a.m. I crossed into Tennessee at 8:15 a.m. The state line felt like it should mean something. A border, a barrier, a checkpoint. It meant nothing. The highway continued uninterrupted. The hills rolled green and indifferent, and the traffic coming from behind me was thickening into a steady stream. My phone had been off for 2 hours. I turned it back on, just long enough to check for messages. There were 11 texts, 3 from coworkers at the center, all variations of "Where are you?" and "Have you seen what's happening?" 2 from my sister in Portland, Marcus, "Call me immediately," and then, 20 minutes later, "Marcus, are you okay? The news is saying Cincinnati is under quarantine. Please call me." 1 from a college friend I had not spoken to in 4 years. 4 from numbers I did not recognize. And 1 from Darla Eckstein. "Angie told me to tell you something else." She said the guard brought in a doctor, and the doctor was on the phone with someone at Wright-Patterson, and she heard him say the word vector, and then he said 48 to 72 hours, ambient temperature dependent. She doesn't know what it means exactly, but she said, "You would know what to do with it." I pulled into a McDonald's parking lot in Jellicoe, Tennessee, and sat with the engine running. Vector, 48 to 72 hours, ambient temperature dependent. I am not a scientist. I am a 911 dispatcher with a bachelor's degree in communications from Northern Kentucky University. But I have spent 11 years triaging information from people who are panicking, and I have learned to hear the architecture inside fragmented data. Whatever was causing those people in the Cincinnati video to move that way, whatever had turned them from human beings into those spastic, overcorrected machines, it had a clock. 48 to 72 hours. And the clock ran faster in heat. It was August. It was going to be 94 degrees today. I called my sister. She answered on the first ring. Marcus, oh my God. I'm okay. I'm in Tennessee. I'm heading south. South where? I don't know yet. Marcus, it's all over the news. They're saying Cincinnati they're using the word containment failure. What does that mean? They showed footage of the National Guard on the Brent Spence Bridge and there were... Jenny, listen to me. Are you safe in Portland? Yes. I think so. It's only in Ohio and Kentucky so far, right? So far. Those two words sat between us like a held breath. Stay inside, I said. Stock up on water and food today. Do it right now, before everyone else does. You're scaring me. Good. Be scared. Go to the store right now. She was quiet for a moment. Where are you going to go? The honest answer was that I had no idea. I was a man alone in a 13-year-old Honda Civic, with no supplies, no weapons, no destination, and no skills beyond the ability to remain calm while listening to suffering. I'll figure it out, I said. I'll call you when I can. I hung up and sat in that parking lot and unfolded the paper map across my steering wheel. I had not used a paper map in 15 years. My eyes traced the highways south from Jellicoe. I-75 continued into Knoxville, then beyond. But highways meant traffic, and traffic meant choke points, and choke points meant stopping, and stopping was the only thing Angie had told me not to do. I traced a finger along a secondary route, Highway 25W, a two-lane road that wound through the mountains parallel to the interstate. Slower, emptier, less predictable. It ran through small towns, La Follette, Lake City, Clinton, each one a variable, each one a place where I would have to make a judgment call about whether to stop. I folded the map and pulled out of the McDonald's. The drive-through line had 14 cars in it. Everyone was buying breakfast. Everyone was staring at their phones in their laps. The world was ending, and people were ordering McMuffins, and I understood that impulse completely, because normalcy is the last drug we give up. I took the exit for 25W and left the interstate behind. La Follette, Tennessee, was a town of about 7,000 people, nestled in a valley between ridges of the Cumberland Mountains. I arrived at 9:40 a.m., and the town had the charged, twitchy energy of a place that knew something was wrong, but had not yet agreed on what. The Walmart had a line out the door. A sheriff's deputy was parked at the main intersection with his lights on, not directing traffic, just sitting there, like a visible reminder that authority still existed. Two men were loading cases of bottled water into the bed of a pickup truck in the Family Dollar parking lot. A church had put up a new message on its roadside sign, "Pray for Ohio." I needed food. I needed supplies. I had been driving for 7 hours on trail mix and water, and the adrenaline was metabolizing into a dull, pervasive exhaustion that settled behind my eyes. I pulled into the parking lot of a Dollar General and went inside. The shelves were thinned but not stripped. I grabbed canned beans, canned tuna, a box of granola bars, 2 gallons of water, a first aid kit, a flashlight, batteries, a utility knife, and a cheap backpack to put it all in. The woman at the register, her name tag said Connie, rang me up without commentary. She had the television behind the counter tuned to a local station. The anchors were talking about a public health emergency in the greater Cincinnati metropolitan area. Behind them, a map showed a red circle encompassing Cincinnati, Covington, Newport, Florence, Erlanger, and most of Hamilton County, Ohio. The circle was large. It had not been that large an hour ago. "You from up there?" Connie asked. "Yeah. My cousin is in Erlanger. She said they won't let people leave." I looked at her and saw the same quiet terror I had seen in the gas station attendant outside Mount Vernon. "Do you have family you can stay with?" I asked. "Somewhere rural? Away from the highway?" She looked at me funny. "Why?" Because that circle on the map is going to get bigger. I do not know why I said it. I had spent my entire career not saying things like that. A dispatcher's job is to calm, not to alarm. You never tell a caller what you really think is happening. You manage information. You control the flow. But I was not wearing my headset anymore, and the protocols that had governed my every word for 11 years were dissolving with every mile I put between myself and that dark room in Covington. Connie stared at me for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called someone. I took my bags and left. Outside, the parking lot had gotten busier. A family, mother, father, 2 kids under 10, was loading their SUV with the same frantic efficiency I recognized from my own speedway stop, 6 hours and a lifetime ago. The father caught my eye. He was maybe 35, thick-armed, wearing a Carhartt jacket despite the heat. "Hey, you know what's going on? Like really?" "I was a 911 dispatcher in Covington," I said. "I left before the bridges closed." His face changed. The muscles around his eyes tightened in a way that told me he understood exactly what that meant. "Is it as bad as people are saying online? I think it might be worse." He looked at his kids, a boy and a girl, both sandy-haired, both looking up at us with the patient confusion of children who know something is wrong but trust the adults to handle it. "We're heading to my wife's parents' place," he said. "Little farm outside Oneida, 20 acres, well water, wood stove. Room for more people if you need somewhere to go." This was the first decision, the first real one. Angie had said drive. She had not said drive alone. She had not said refuse every hand extended. "My name is Marcus," I said. "Glenn Turcotte," he said, and extended his hand. "That's my wife Rhonda, and our kids, Baylor and June." Rhonda gave me a tense nod from the passenger seat. Baylor waved. June was asleep. "Follow us," Glenn said. "It's about an hour east." I got in my car. I followed them. The Turcotte farm, or rather, Rhonda's parents' farm, sat at the end of a gravel road that branched off a county route, that branched off a state highway, that I would never have found without following Glenn's taillights. The property was a long, narrow valley backed up against a wooded ridge, with a white clapboard house, a metal-roofed barn, 2 outbuildings, and a fenced garden that was going full August riot, with tomatoes and squash and beans climbing bamboo poles. A creek ran along the eastern edge, shallow and clear, muttering over rocks. Glenn's in-laws were named Eldon and Patricia Hargrove. Eldon was 71, bow-legged, wearing overalls, and a face that suggested he had been expecting something like this for decades, and was annoyed it had taken so long. Patricia was 68, small, fierce-eyed, and had already begun filling every available container with water from the well by the time we pulled in. She did not look surprised to see a stranger trailing her son-in-law. She looked at me once, assessed me the way you assess a tool. "What is it, and is it useful?" and said, "Can you swing an axe?" "I can learn," I said. "Good enough." Firewood pile is past the barn. That was my welcome. No orientation speech, no introductions beyond the immediate. Patricia Hargrove operated on the assumption that if you were here, you were working, and if you were working, you belonged, and the details could sort themselves out later. I appreciated this more than I can express. After 7 hours of driving through escalating dread, the simple command to perform a physical task felt like a rope thrown to a drowning man. I split wood for 2 hours. The rhythm of it, the swing, the crack, the split halves falling, emptied my head in a way I desperately needed. Baylor sat on a stump nearby and watched me with the scholarly attention of a 7-year-old studying an unfamiliar adult. He asked me where I was from. He asked me if I had a dog. He asked me if the sick people were going to come here. I told him Covington, no, and I did not think so. The third answer was a lie. I had no idea whether they would come here. Inside the house, Glenn and Rhonda were organizing. They had brought supplies from their place in La Follette, enough for maybe a week if stretched. Eldon had a pantry stocked with canned goods and dry staples that Patricia rotated religiously. There was a chest freezer in the barn with 100 pounds of venison from last season. The well was hand pump accessible if the power went out. On paper, the farm was in decent shape. In practice, it was a 71-year-old man's retirement property being asked to function as a survival compound, and the distance between those two things was vast. At noon, Glenn set up a battery-powered radio on the kitchen table, and we gathered around it like a family from 1940. The news had progressed from public health emergency to something considerably worse. The red circle on the map, which I could now only imagine, since we had no television, had expanded beyond Cincinnati. Reports were coming from Dayton, Columbus, Indianapolis. The word quarantine was being used less frequently. The word evacuation had replaced it, and behind both words, never quite spoken directly, but audible in the white space between sentences, was the understanding that neither quarantine nor evacuation was working. At 12:30 p.m., the station we were monitoring broadcast an interview with a National Guard spokesperson who used the phrase aggressive behavioral modification consistent with a pathogenic vector. I sat up straight. Pathogenic vector. That matched what Darla had texted me, the doctor at the center. The phrase 48 to 72 hours, ambient temperature dependent. What does that mean? Rhonda asked from the kitchen doorway. It means it's a disease, I said, and it burns out. Everyone looked at me. I realized I had said more than I intended. I realized that the information Angie had fed me through Darla, fragmented, overheard, unconfirmed, was now the most valuable thing in the room. Tell us everything, Glenn said. So I did. I told them about Angie's call, about the board lighting up, about Cincinnati dispatch going dark, about the guard sealing the 911 center, about the doctor on the phone mentioning a vector with a temperature-dependent timer. I told them about the video from the parking garage, the runners, the wrong movement, the thing that caught the woman at the bus stop. I told them what I had seen driving south, the empty northbound lanes, the police cruiser with no siren, the thinning radio stations. They listened without interrupting. Eldon stood by the window with his arms crossed. Patricia sat at the table with her hands folded. Glenn leaned against the counter. Rhonda held June on her hip. Baylor had been sent to the living room, but was almost certainly listening from behind the door. When I finished, the silence lasted a long time. So we wait, Eldon said. If the information is right, I said. 48 to 72 hours. The infected burn out. They stop. And if the information is wrong, then we have a much bigger problem. Eldon nodded. He did not press the point. He was a man who had farmed this valley for 40 years and understood that you plan for what you can and endure what you cannot, and the space between the two is where character lives. We spent the afternoon fortifying, not in any dramatic militaristic sense. Eldon did not have an arsenal or razor wire or reinforced walls. We blocked the gravel road with his tractor and a fallen oak he had been meaning to clear since spring. We closed and latched every gate. Glenn nailed plywood over the 2 ground-floor windows that faced the road. Patricia inventoried the pantry with the precision of an accountant and announced we had enough food for 8 people for 12 days, assuming moderate rationing. I did the math. There were 6 of us. That buffer was thin but real. At 3 p.m., a truck came up the county road and stopped at the blocked driveway. Glenn and Eldon walked down with a deer rifle, not pointed, just present. I followed at a distance. The truck held a man and a woman, both in their 40s, both looking ragged and scared. They said they were from Williamsburg, 30 miles south, and had been turned away from a church shelter that was already full. They asked if they could park on the property for the night. Glenn looked at Eldon. Eldon looked at Patricia, who had come down to the road without anyone noticing. She studied the couple the way she had studied me. Quick, structural, decisive. You have food? She asked. Some. Couple days' worth. Weapons? The man hesitated. Shotgun in the bed. Box of shells. Patricia looked at Eldon. Something passed between them that did not require words. Pull in past the tractor, she said. You can sleep in the barn. There are blankets in the chest by the stalls. The couple, their names were Dale and Wendy Pritchard, pulled in and parked near the barn. Dale shook everyone's hand. Wendy hugged Patricia, who accepted it with the stiff tolerance of a woman who had not invited the gesture, but understood its necessity. Within an hour, Dale was helping Glenn reinforce the garden fence, and Wendy was in the kitchen with Rhonda, cutting vegetables for dinner. We were 8 people now. Patricia's 12-day calculation had just become a 10-day calculation. I sat on the porch as the sun started its descent and listened to the radio through the open kitchen window. The reports were worsening by the hour. Louisville was reporting incidents. Knoxville, barely 100 miles west of us, had its first confirmed cases. The governor of Tennessee had declared a state of emergency and activated the full National Guard. The president had addressed the nation at 2 p.m. and used the words unprecedented biological event without ever specifying what the biology was. I looked at the hills around us, green, quiet, ancient. The creek made its steady sound. Fireflies were beginning to assemble in the lower field. Somewhere north of here, the world I had known was eating itself alive, and here, in this valley, everything was absurdly, temporarily beautiful. I held both truths at the same time. That is all you can do. The first one came at 11:40 that night. I was sleeping, or trying to sleep, on a cot in the smaller outbuilding that Eldon had set up as a guest room of sorts. Dale and Wendy were in the barn. Glenn, Rhonda, and the kids were in the upstairs bedroom of the house. Eldon and Patricia were in their room on the ground floor. We had agreed to keep watch in shifts, and Dale had the first rotation. He was sitting in a lawn chair near the blocked driveway, with his shotgun across his knees. I heard him yell, not a scream, not a panicked shout, a single, sharp, commanding yell, the kind of sound a man makes when he wants something to stop approaching. Hey! Hey, stop right there! I was on my feet before I was fully awake. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside, into a darkness that was total, except for the stars, and the dim yellow glow from the porch light Eldon had left on. I could see Dale standing, the shotgun raised to his shoulder, pointing down the driveway toward the road. Something was moving in the gap beside the tractor. It was a person. Or it had been. I could see the silhouette, upright, bipedal, human-shaped. But the movement was wrong in exactly the way the video from Cincinnati had shown me. Too fast for walking, too irregular for running. The limbs moved with a jerking, involuntary quality, like a marionette, operated by someone having a seizure. It was making a sound, not a moan, not a growl, nothing from the movies. A high, thin, aspirated wheeze, like someone trying to breathe through a throat that had mostly closed. "Stop!" Dale shouted again. "I will shoot you." It did not stop. It did not react to his voice at all. It squeezed past the tractor and came up the driveway at that wrong, stuttering pace, and I could see now that it was a man, middle-aged, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, barefoot, his face slack and his eyes reflecting the porch light with a flat, wet sheen that held no recognition, no thought, no person behind it. Dale fired. The shotgun blast in the dark valley was enormous, a physical concussion that echoed off the ridges and sent something crashing through the underbrush on the hillside. The man stumbled, buckled sideways, and went down on the gravel. He did not scream. He made no sound at all after the impact. He lay on his side and his legs continued to move in that jerking pattern for another 15 seconds, as though the signal to run had not reached the part of him that knew he was dying. Then he stopped. Lights came on in the house. Glenn appeared on the porch with the deer rifle. Eldon was behind him with a pistol I had not known he owned. Rhonda was at the upstairs window, silhouetted, pulling the children back. Patricia stood in the doorway holding a kerosene lantern, like a woman from another century. "One of them," Dale said. His voice was shaking. The shotgun was still raised. "Came right up the drive. Didn't stop when I told it to." We stood in a loose semicircle around the body. Eldon shone a work light on it. The man was maybe 50. His feet were torn up. He had been walking or running barefoot for miles across mountain roads. His fingernails were cracked and bloody. His mouth was open and there was something dark around his gums that I did not want to examine closely. He was wearing a wedding ring. "Could be more," Glenn said quietly. "Where did he come from?" I asked. "Knoxville's reports only started this afternoon." "That's 100 miles. Williamsburg's closer," Dale said. "We heard things were bad there before we left." I looked at the dark road beyond the tractor. The mountains were invisible walls on either side of the valley, dark masses blocking the stars. Anything could be moving through those woods. Anything could be coming down that road. "We need to watch both directions," I said, "all night. 2 people at a time." No one argued. There was no discussion, no debate, no democratic process. The body on the gravel had settled all arguments. We dragged him to the far edge of the property, and then we took our positions, and then we waited for the rest of the night to pass or not pass. 3 more came before dawn. The second arrived at 1:15 a.m. from the same direction as the first, the county road, heading up the valley. This one was a woman, younger, wearing hospital scrubs. She moved faster than the first man, that impossible stuttering sprint, and Dale dropped her at 40 yards. The third came from the opposite direction at 2:50 a.m., climbing over the back fence near the garden. Glenn got him with the deer rifle from the porch. The fourth appeared at 4:20 a.m., emerging from the tree line on the eastern ridge, like a ghost materializing from the forest. He stumbled down the slope, hit the creek, fell, got up, fell again, and eventually stopped moving on his own. He lay in the shallow water, making that thin breathing sound until the sound stopped. We did not approach him until morning. Nobody slept. Baylor and June were in the upstairs closet, with blankets and a flashlight and a picture book. Rhonda was with them. The rest of us sat in the kitchen with the lights off, watching the windows, listening to the dark. The radio played low on the counter, cycling between fragmentary reports and long stretches of automated emergency tones. At 3:30 a.m., FEMA issued a nationwide shelter-in-place order. At 4 a.m., the governor of Tennessee announced a dusk-to-dawn curfew. At 4:45 a.m., a local station out of Knoxville broadcast what sounded like a live feed from a reporter, embedded with National Guard units on Chapman Highway, and the sounds in the background, the gunfire, the vehicles, the shouting, made Patricia reach over and turn the volume down. At first light, I walked the perimeter with Eldon. The old man moved deliberately through the gray dawn mist, checking fences, scanning the tree line, cataloging every point of vulnerability, with the same practical eye he probably used to assess fence posts and drainage ditches. He did not waste words. "How long did you say?" he asked. 48 to 72 hours from infection. That's what I overheard secondhand. It's not confirmed. Call it 3 days, if the information is right. When did it start? The first cases. I did the math. Angie had called me at 2:47 a.m. She said the board lit up 20 minutes before that. But the cases she was receiving were attacks, which meant the infected were already active, which meant they had been infected hours or days before that. "I don't know when patient 0 was," I said. "The first wave hit Cincinnati Emergency Services sometime around 2 a.m. yesterday. But the infections that produced that wave could have started a day or 2 before." Eldon looked at the sky. Clear, blue, already warming. So the clock might already be running down. Maybe. Or the clock is different for each person, depending on when they were infected, which means new waves keep coming as new people convert. He absorbed this the way he absorbed everything, silently, totally. "Then we hold," he said. "We hold and we count days and we stay alive." At 8 a.m., a car appeared on the county road, not infected, a working vehicle, a silver sedan moving at normal speed. It stopped near the blocked driveway. A woman got out. She was maybe 30, black, wearing a paramedic's uniform shirt and civilian pants, and she had blood on her hands that she had tried to wash off and failed. She stood on the far side of the tractor and called out, "Please! I've been driving all night from Knoxville. My partner was bitten at a scene and I left him." "I had to leave him. I don't have anywhere to go. Please." Her name was Simone Ibarra. She was an EMT with the Rural Metro Fire Department in Knox County. She had been on a call, a domestic disturbance that turned out to be something else entirely, when her partner was attacked. She had pulled him into the ambulance and driven 2 blocks before he began seizing, and she realized what was happening. She stopped the rig, got out, took his car keys from the cup holder, found his personal vehicle in the station lot, and drove east into the mountains. Patricia let her in. We were 9. Simone changed everything, not because she was one more mouth to feed, though Patricia's calculations adjusted again with that silent, grim efficiency, but because she had medical knowledge. Real, practical, field-tested knowledge. She had been inside the crisis, in a way none of us had. She had touched it. She had seen the conversion happen in real time, inches away from her, in the confined space of an ambulance. She told us what she knew, while Patricia cleaned and bandaged the small cuts on her hands. Not bites, she assured us repeatedly. Just abrasions from climbing over debris. The infected did not behave like anything in her training. They were not unconscious. They were not seizing, exactly. They seemed to be operating on a kind of neurological override. The parts of the brain that govern voluntary movement, decision-making, communication, and self-preservation had been essentially switched off, and something else was driving the body. Pure motor function without executive control. They did not use tools. They did not open doors. They ran in straight lines until they hit something, and then they redirected and ran again. They attacked with hands and teeth, because those were the body parts that connected during the collision. They're not hunting, Simone said. They're not strategic. They're crashing into things. If you get out of their direct path, most of the time, they just keep going. The problem is when there are a lot of them. When a crowd of them converges on a space, the sheer density makes avoidance impossible. What about the timer? I asked. 48 to 72 hours. Does that match what you saw? She looked at me sharply. Where did you hear that? I told her about Darla's text, the doctor at the 911 center, the overheard conversation. Simone was quiet for a long time. Then she said, my partner. When he was bitten, he started showing symptoms in about 15 minutes. Tremors first, then the eyes. The pupils blew out completely, both sides, which means massive autonomic disruption. He was fully gone in under 30 minutes. But I saw patients at the scene we responded to who were already active and had been, based on the neighbor's 911 call times, for at least 12 hours. They were slower, less coordinated. One of them was walking into a wall repeatedly, just bouncing off it and walking into it again, like the signal was degrading. So they wear out, Glenn said. They burn out, Simone corrected. The body can't sustain that level of neurological overdrive. The muscles are firing constantly. There's no rest, no hydration, no caloric intake. They're running their own bodies into the ground. 48 to 72 hours in this heat. Yeah, I believe that. I've seen runners collapse from heat exhaustion at marathons in less. And these things are sprinting non-stop. But new infections keep the cycle going, I said. Exactly. Every person who gets bitten is a new 48-hour clock. So the wave keeps rolling as long as there are uninfected people in contact range. It only stops when the infected either burn out or run out of new hosts. I looked around the kitchen. 9 people in a valley at the end of a gravel road, at the end of a county road, at the edge of the Cumberland Mountains. We were, by any measure, running out of hosts in our immediate vicinity. Then our strategy is simple, Eldon said from his post by the window. We stay put. We stay quiet. We let them burn. And we handle whatever comes up that driveway, Dale added. With what? Wendy asked. It was the first time she had spoken in hours. Dale, you have maybe 20 shells left. Glenn has a box of rifle cartridges. What happens if 20 of them come at once? 50? Nobody answered. The math was unfavorable, and everyone in the room could do it. Then we need to not be here when 50 come at once, I said. We need a fallback, somewhere we can retreat to if the property is overrun. Eldon looked at me. Then he looked at the ridge behind the house. There's a cave, he said. Quarter-mile up the slope. Used to play in it as a boy. Big enough for all of us. That became the plan. Hold the farm. If the farm fails, retreat to the cave. Survive until the clocks run out. That afternoon, while Glenn, Dale, and Eldon worked on reinforcing the property's outer fence with scrap lumber and barbed wire from the barn, I hiked up the ridge with Simone to assess the cave. It was a hard scramble through second-growth forest, steep enough that my bad knee protested with every step. Simone moved through the woods with an athlete's efficiency. She told me she had been a cross-country runner at UT Knoxville before switching to paramedic studies, and her body remembered the terrain. The cave was real, not a crack in the rock or a shallow overhang, an actual limestone cave, the mouth about 8 feet wide and 5 feet tall, descending into a passage that widened after about 20 feet, into a chamber Eldon had described accurately as big enough. The ceiling was 12 feet at its peak. The floor was dry limestone with a thin layer of sediment. It was cool inside, maybe 60 degrees, and the air moved, which meant there was ventilation somewhere deeper in the system. It smelled like mineral water and old earth. "This works," Simone said, sweeping her flashlight across the chamber. "We could put bedding in here. Keep supplies stocked. The entrance is narrow enough to defend and elevated enough that anything coming up the slope would be visible for a couple 100 yards. If they can climb slopes," I said. "They can. I saw them on stairs in Knoxville. It's ugly. They fall, they get up, they fall again. But they make progress. They just can't do it quietly." We spent an hour carrying supplies up the ridge. Water jugs, canned food, blankets, the first aid kit, a battery lantern. We made 3 trips each, and by the end, my knee was a swollen knot of protest, and Simone had to help me down the last section of trail. She did it without commentary, just a hand under my elbow and a steady pace, and I was grateful for the absence of questions. At the bottom, near the creek, she stopped. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "You said you were a 911 dispatcher, that you left before the bridges closed because a colleague warned you." "That's right." "How many people were calling in when you left?" I knew what she was asking. Angie said 37 calls holding when she called me. 37 people on the line, waiting for help, and your colleague called you instead. She called me on her personal phone. On her own time. She didn't abandon the board. I'm not judging her. I'm not judging you. I left my partner in an ambulance. I drove away while he was still changing. I don't have standing to judge anyone. She paused. I'm asking because I need to know if you're carrying that. Because I'm carrying mine. And if we're both carrying guilt that heavy, one of us needs to be the one who functions through it. I looked at her. She was standing in the creek bed with the water running over her boots, her paramedic shirt still stained with someone else's blood, her eyes steady and raw and completely honest. I'm carrying it, I said, but I can function. Then we take shifts, she said. You function, then I function. Nobody has to hold it together all the time. That was the deal we made. Standing in a creek in the Cumberland Mountains, while the world collapsed in expanding circles around us. Not a friendship exactly, not a partnership, a mutual agreement to trade off the burden of remaining competent. Back at the house, the radio delivered the afternoon's news in monotone fragments. Atlanta was reporting cases. St. Louis, Nashville was under full military lockdown. The CDC had issued a statement confirming a novel pathogen with acute neurological presentation and a finite symptomatic window. Finite symptomatic window. That was the official version of what Simone and I already knew from a dead woman's text and a burned-out paramedic's field observation. The clocks were running, all of them. The infected burning through their bodies, the supplies burning through our pantry, the ammunition burning through our magazines. The question was, which clock hit zero first? Day 2 on the farm. August heat pressed down on the valley like a hand. By noon it was 97 degrees, and the air had that viscous, saturated quality that makes breathing feel like work. Eldon said it was the hottest day of the summer. Simone and I looked at each other across the porch and shared the same unspoken thought. Good. Hotter means faster. The clocks burn down quicker when the engine overheats. We had settled into a rhythm. Glenn and Dale handled perimeter defense and firewood. Eldon managed the property's infrastructure. The well pump, the generator, the fences. Patricia and Rhonda ran the kitchen and the supply inventory. Wendy tended the garden, which was producing enough fresh vegetables to meaningfully extend our provisions. Simone was our medical authority, treating blisters, dispensing ibuprofen for my knee, and monitoring everyone for signs of illness or injury. Baylor and June were given the job of carrying water from the well to the house in small buckets, which kept them busy and visible and accounted for. My role emerged organically, and it surprised me. I became the communications hub, not because I had a radio or a special frequency. Our battery-powered AM receiver was all we had. but because my decade of dispatch work had trained me to synthesize fragmented information into coherent operational pictures. I sat on the porch with the radio and a notebook, and I tracked every report, every timestamp, every geographic reference. I built a timeline. I mapped the spread. I correlated the CDC's finite symptomatic window with Simone's field observations and the fragments Darla had texted me. I became the person everyone came to when they wanted to know what was happening, and I gave them the clearest picture I could construct from the static and the silence. What I knew by noon on day 2 was this. The outbreak had originated in the greater Cincinnati area approximately 60 hours ago. It had spread concentrically, following population density corridors, highways, cities, suburbs. The infection was transmitted through bites and possibly through fluid contact. The incubation period was 15 to 30 minutes. The active phase lasted 48 to 72 hours, at which point the infected individual collapsed from systemic physiological failure, organ shutdown driven by uncontrolled hyperthermia, dehydration, and muscle breakdown. In this heat, the lower end of that window was more likely, which meant the first wave, the Cincinnati wave, was already dying, but the second wave, the people infected by the first wave, was at its peak, and the third wave was just beginning. The math was clear. The outbreak would continue to produce new active infected for as long as uninfected people remained in contact range. It would not end all at once. It would end in ripples, the way a dropped stone's waves diminish as they travel outward from the impact point. We were in the outer ripples. The question was whether those ripples still had enough force to drown us. At 2 p.m., a family of 4 arrived at the blocked driveway, then a couple in a pickup truck, then a single man on foot, carrying nothing but a gallon jug and a Bible, then 2 women in a Honda, with a dog in the back seat. By 4 p.m., 5 separate groups had found their way to our valley, each following the same logic. Get off the highway, find a rural road, drive until you find people who look like they know what they are doing. Patricia held a council on the porch. It was not a formal thing. She simply stood in the doorway and spoke, and everyone within earshot stopped and listened, because Patricia Hargrove had that quality. Eldon and I have discussed it. We will accept people who bring food, supplies, or useful skills. We will not turn away children under any circumstances. But this property cannot hold everyone who shows up, and we are not a shelter. We are a family trying to survive. If you stay, you contribute. If you cannot contribute, we will share what food we can spare and point you toward the next valley. It was not warm. It was not cruel. It was the math of survival spoken by a woman who had been doing that math her entire life. By nightfall, the farm held 23 people. I will not describe every arrival or catalog every face. What I will tell you is that among those 23 were a retired electrician named Howard, who immediately began assessing Eldon's generator, a high school teacher named Carmen, who took over the children's care with a competence that freed Rhonda and Wendy for other tasks, a young couple, Tyler and Meg, who had been camping in the Smokies when the news reached them, and who had a tent and 2 weeks of freeze-dried backpacking food, and a man named Royce, who arrived alone in a truck with a toolbox, a hunting rifle, and nothing to say about where he had come from or who he had left behind. Patricia's rationing calculations were now the heartbeat of the operation. She had restructured the entire food supply into a system of daily allocations measured by the cup and the ounce. Breakfast was oats and water. Lunch was canned vegetables and hardtack that she baked in the wood stove from flour she had been storing in 5-gallon buckets in the barn. Dinner was the best meal. A stew built from garden produce and venison, seasoned with whatever Patricia had in her spice cabinet, served in carefully measured portions. Nobody complained. Nobody took more than their share. The shared proximity to extinction had dissolved the social norms that normally governed strangers' behavior and replaced them with something older and more efficient. We set watches, 4-hour shifts, 2 people at a time, covering the driveway and the ridge. I took the 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift with Simone. We sat on the porch in the dark, listening. The valley was quiet in a way that felt alive, not silent, but hushed, the way a room hushes when something is about to happen. You've been tracking the timeline, Simone said, keeping her voice low. Where are we? The Cincinnati wave is done. 72 hours passed this afternoon. Anyone infected in that first surge is either dead or collapsed. But the wave that hit Knoxville is still active, and whatever infected those 4 we dealt with last night, that wave is probably peaking right now. How far does the ripple reach? Depends on density. These mountains help. Low population, difficult terrain, limited road access. But the interstate corridors are still pumping infected outward, and anyone who fled north, south, east, or west carried the infection with them. The geography doesn't matter if somebody drives it in. She was quiet for a while. A whippoorwill called from the ridge. The creek made its constant sound. I keep thinking about my partner, she said. Dwayne. His name was Dwayne Ratliff. 12 years on the rig. Taught me everything. When he was bitten, the first thing he said was go. He knew. He knew what was coming. And his last coherent act was to tell me to leave him. I thought about Angie on the phone at 2:47 a.m., choosing to call me, instead of saving that minute for herself. The people who warned us, I said. They gave us their time. Literally, their time. Minutes, seconds, whatever they had left, they handed to us. And we spend that time hiding in mountains. We spend that time staying alive so the warning wasn't wasted. She accepted that. I do not know if she believed it, but she accepted it. And at this point in the collapse, the distinction was academic. At midnight, Royce relieved me. He took the chair without a word and cradled his rifle and stared into the dark with an expression that suggested he was already in a conversation with something I could not hear. I went inside and lay on the floor of the living room between Howard's snoring form and Tyler's sleeping bag, and I closed my eyes, and I did not sleep, but I rested, which is a different thing, a lesser thing, but still a currency worth spending. Somewhere out there, the clocks were ticking, the infected were burning, the wave was moving. And we were waiting. They came at 3:12 a.m., not 1 or 2 or 4, a group. Royce fired the first shot and did not stop firing. The sound shattered the valley's silence like a rock through a window, and I was on my feet before the echo died. I grabbed the flashlight and pushed through the screen door, and what I saw in the driveway stopped my breath. 7 of them. 8. 9. I could not count because they were moving, all of them, that hideous stuttering gait, pouring through the gap beside the tractor like water through a crack in a dam. Royce was on the porch, firing with mechanical precision, dropping one, cycling the bolt, acquiring another. Glenn appeared beside him with the deer rifle. Dale came from the barn with the shotgun. The sound was annihilating. Rifle cracks, shotgun blasts, the slap of bodies hitting gravel, and underneath it, all that thin wheezing sound multiplied by 9, a chorus of damaged lungs pushing air through throats that had forgotten how to regulate breathing. I had no weapon. I stood on the porch with a flashlight, and I did the only thing I knew how to do. I directed. Glenn, left side. There are 2 coming around the fence. Dale, hold the barn door. There's one heading toward the structure. Royce, reload. You're out. The words came from a place I did not consciously access. They came from the headset, from the chair, from 11 years of controlling chaos with my voice. I could not shoot. I could not fight, but I could see the whole field, and I could process the movement of 9 hostile bodies simultaneously and tell the people with weapons where to aim. It worked. Not elegantly, not cleanly, but it worked. In 90 seconds, the driveway was still. 9 bodies lay in the gravel and the dust and the dark, and the valley was quiet again, except for the ringing in everyone's ears, and the sound of Baylor crying upstairs. Rhonda's voice came from the window. Is it over? Clear, I said. The word came out in the dispatch cadence, clipped, definitive, professional. I heard it and almost laughed. Clear. Like I was closing a call, like I could enter a code and move to the next blinking light on the board. Simone was already moving among the bodies with a lantern, checking each one with clinical efficiency. All down, all expired or expiring. None of them look freshly infected. The muscle wasting is significant. I'd estimate these were converted 30 to 40 hours ago. That means they're late stage, I said. They were already slowing down. If these had been early stage, first 12 hours, we would not have been able to stop them at this range. They would have been too fast. That hung in the air. We had survived because we had encountered the trailing edge of a wave, the weakened, degrading remnant. If the wave had hit us at full strength, with fresh converts running at peak neurological overdrive, our small arsenal and our plywood windows and our tractor barricade would have meant nothing. "We need to leave," Simone said to me quietly, while the others dragged bodies to the far edge of the property. "If another group comes, a bigger group, a fresher group, we cannot hold this." The cave. The cave. I found Eldon by the well, filling buckets by moonlight. His face was gray with exhaustion, but his hands were steady. "Eldon, we need to start moving supplies up the ridge. Tonight." He looked at the driveway, at the dark stains on the gravel, at the gap beside the tractor where 9 bodies had pushed through. He nodded once. For the next 3 hours, every person on the property who could carry weight made trips up the ridge trail. Canned goods, water, blankets, ammunition, the radio, the first aid kit, lanterns, the children's picture books. We moved everything we could carry from a farmhouse in a valley to a hole in a mountain, and we did it in the dark, in the heat, in silence, because Simone had taught us that sound was what drew them, and we had just given them more sound than this valley had produced in a century. We sealed ourselves in the cave at dawn on day 3. 23 people in a limestone chamber 60 feet underground, breathing air that tasted like wet rock and old time. Patricia organized the space with the same precision she had applied to the pantry. Sleeping areas along the walls, supply cache in the deepest section, a latrine trench in a side passage Eldon remembered from his boyhood explorations. Howard, the retired electrician, rigged the battery lanterns to a dimmer he fashioned from spare wire, giving us light that was functional without being wasteful. Carmen gathered the 5 children, Baylor, June, and 3 others who had arrived with the later families, into a corner she designated as the school, and she began teaching them multiplication tables with a calm, deliberate voice that was the bravest thing I witnessed during the entire ordeal. I sat near the cave entrance with the radio and my notebook. The entrance faced east, and through it I could see the valley below, the farmhouse, the barn, the garden, the block driveway. Everything looked peaceful from up here, a postcard of rural Appalachia. The dark stains on the gravel were not visible from this distance. The radio was struggling for signal inside the limestone, so I held it near the mouth of the cave and turned the volume low. The broadcasts had changed character overnight. The panicked, fragmented reports of the first 2 days had been replaced by something more measured, but also more ominous. The voice of institutions, recalibrating around a catastrophe they had failed to prevent. The CDC confirmed the pathogen's neurological mechanism. The incubation period was officially listed as 10 to 40 minutes. The active symptomatic phase was officially listed as 36 to 72 hours, depending on environmental conditions. In current summer temperatures across the southeastern United States, the lower end of that range was observed in the majority of cases. The math was clarifying. The Cincinnati wave was extinct. The Louisville, Nashville, and Knoxville waves were cresting and beginning to subside. The Atlanta wave was near its peak. The further from the origin point, the thinner the wave. Not because the pathogen was less virulent, but because each successive ring of infection encountered more dispersed populations and more warned, prepared survivors. The geometry of the thing was almost beautiful in its cruel logic. A circle of fire that grew weaker as it grew larger, burning hottest at the center and cooling at the edges. We were at the edge. We were in the cooling zone, and the 9 bodies on Eldon's driveway had been among the last embers to reach us. But I could not say that with certainty, and certainty was the only currency that mattered when 23 people were living in a cave. At noon, I convened what had become an informal leadership group on the ledge outside the cave entrance. Myself, Eldon, Simone, Glenn, and Patricia. I shared what I had compiled, based on the official CDC timeline and the infection spread data from radio reports. The wave affecting our region peaked approximately 12 to 18 hours ago. The infected from that wave are now in their degradation phase. We should see significantly reduced activity over the next 24 hours, and near total cessation within 48. Should, Glenn repeated. Should. There are variables I can't account for. Straggler infections, people bitten late who are just now converting. Isolated pockets we don't know about. But the overall trend is collapse. The pathogen is self-limiting. The infected are destroying their own bodies faster than they can infect new hosts, especially now that population centers are either evacuated or locked down. Eldon squinted at the valley. So we hold one more day, maybe two, to be safe. We can do 2 days, Patricia said. She had already done the rationing math in her head. I could see it in the way her eyes moved, calculating portions and people and hours. Food holds. Water holds. We are uncomfortable, but alive. Simone leaned against the rock wall. Her paramedic shirt was filthy, and her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion. But her voice was steady. I've been watching the ones you killed last night from up here. None of them moved after they went down. That's consistent with late-stage burnout. Whatever is still mobile out there is running on fumes. Running on fumes. Everything was. The afternoon passed in the peculiar suspended time of people waiting for something to end. I sat near the entrance and monitored the radio. Glenn and Royce took shifts watching the valley with binoculars Eldon had pulled from a closet. The children did multiplication tables and drew pictures on the cave walls with chunks of soft limestone. Dale slept for the first time in 2 days, a deep unconsciousness so total that Wendy checked his pulse twice. Patricia distributed lunch. Half a can of beans per person, a handful of granola, a cup of water, and nobody spoke during the meal, because speech requires energy, and energy was being conserved for essential functions. Simone sat beside me, in the late afternoon light, filtering through the cave mouth. We had developed a routine of proximity that was not friendship and not romance, and not anything that had a name. It was 2 people who had agreed to take turns functioning, and the boundary between those turns had blurred until we were simply 2 halves of something operational. I've been thinking about the calls, she said. Which calls? The 37 calls holding. When Angie called you. 37 people waiting for help, and the help was already being redirected. I had been thinking about them too. Not constantly. The demands of survival had compressed my guilt into a dense, manageable kernel that I carried in my chest like a stone. But in the quiet moments, the faces I imagined behind those blinking lines reassembled themselves. A man having a heart attack. A woman hiding from her infected husband. A child alone in a house, calling 911 the way children are taught to, trusting that the voice will answer. I don't know what happened to them, I said. No, I can't know. There's no way to know. I know. She paused. But you're going to carry it anyway. Aren't you carrying yours? She looked at her hands. The blood was gone. She had scrubbed them raw in the creek, but the memory of it was readable in the way she held them, slightly apart from her body, as though they still contained something she had not consented to touch. Dwayne told me to go. That's the difference. He made the choice for me. Your callers didn't choose. They dialed a number, and the system failed them. I didn't fail them. The system failed them. That's what I tell myself about Dwayne, too. That the pathogen failed him, not me. She met my eyes. It doesn't help, does it? Not yet. Okay. Not yet. At 6 p.m., the radio broadcast something that made me call everyone to the entrance. A National Guard spokesperson, broadcasting on the emergency frequency, read a prepared statement. Based on epidemiological data collected over the past 72 hours, the CDC has confirmed that the active symptomatic phase of the Cincinnati pathogen is universally self-limiting. All individuals exhibiting aggressive symptomatic behavior will undergo complete physiological collapse within a maximum of 72 hours from onset. Current modeling indicates that active infected populations in the eastern United States will reach terminal decline within the next 24 to 48 hours. Citizens in shelter-in-place positions are urged to remain in place until an all-clear is issued by local authorities. The cave was silent for a long moment after I turned the volume down. Then Baylor, who had been listening from behind Carmen with his serious 7-year-old eyes, said, "Does that mean the sick people are going to stop?" Yes, Patricia said, before anyone else could answer. That is exactly what it means. It was not exactly what it meant. It meant the projections supported that conclusion, which is different from the conclusion itself. But Patricia understood something about information that I, with all my dispatch training, had. It is function. And a 7-year-old boy in a cave needed to hear that the sick people were going to stop. We ate dinner. Stew again. Thinner now. More water than substance. And we set watches. And we settled in for what I told everyone would be the last night. I hoped I was not lying. I took the midnight watch alone. Simone had finally collapsed into sleep around 10 p.m., her body surrendering to exhaustion with an abruptness that frightened me, until I checked her breathing and found it slow and steady and deep. She had been functioning for 72 hours on fragments of rest and the fumes of professional obligation, and her system had simply decided, without consulting her, that it was time to stop. I sat at the cave mouth with the deer rifle Glenn had lent me, not because I could shoot accurately, but because holding a weapon in the dark is a different experience than holding a flashlight, and the difference is not about capability, but about the story you tell yourself regarding your own agency. I watched the valley. The moon was 3/4 full, and the farmhouse below was a gray shape surrounded by darker shapes. Nothing moved. The creek glittered. The fireflies were gone. Too late in the season, or too disturbed by the gunfire, I could not say. At 1:15 a.m., I saw one. A single figure, moving along the county road below, visible in the moonlight as a dark, stuttering silhouette. It was heading east, away from the farm, following the road toward the next valley. Its gait was the worst I had seen. Barely coordinated, lurching, a body running its last few hundred yards on depleted batteries. It moved like a wind-up toy at the end of its spring, jerky, decelerating, mechanical. I watched it through the binoculars. It traveled maybe 200 yards past the farm's driveway. Then it stopped. Not a dramatic collapse. It just gradually ceased moving, the way a spinning top wobbles and slows and finally tips. It stood still for perhaps 10 seconds, swaying, and then it folded. Knees first, then hips, then shoulders, and lay in the road. Its limbs twitched twice, then nothing. I marked the time in my notebook, 1:23 a.m. I wrote beside it, last observed active infected. I did not know, at that moment, that it would actually be the last one I ever saw moving. I recorded it as data, not prophecy. But when I look at that notebook now, which I still have, which I will always have, that entry marks the exact minute the wave broke against the edge of our valley and receded for good. The rest of the night was silence, true silence, not the held breath silence of the previous nights. The silence of a thing that is over. At 4 a.m., the radio broadcast updated casualty projections that I will not repeat because numbers that large stop being numbers and become abstraction. At 5 a.m., the first military helicopters passed over the valley heading northeast, their rotors chopping the pre-dawn air with a sound that woke half the cave. At 6 a.m., the sky began to lighten in the east, and I sat on the ledge and watched the valley fill with color. Green, gold, blue, and I felt something in my chest release. Not all at once, but a slow unlocking, a bolt being drawn back, a door that had been braced shut for 3 days beginning to open. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that. I sat on a rock at the mouth of a cave in the Cumberland Mountains, and I watched the sun come up, and I did not cry. What I did was take out my phone, dead, useless as a phone, but still functional as a clock. And I stared at the dark screen, and I thought about Angie Reeves sitting in a sealed building in Covington, Kentucky, with a headset on, absorbing the end of the world through her earpiece, staying on the line, because that was the job, and that was who she was, and she would not leave. I thought about the 4 minutes and 13 seconds of that phone call at 2:47 a.m., the most important call I ever received. Not a 911 call, a personal call, a human being deciding that another human being deserved a warning. I stared at the dark screen for a long time. Then I put the phone away and went inside to wake the others. The all clear came 41 hours later. National Guard convoys rolled through the county roads. Helicopters surveyed the valleys. We walked down the ridge and back into Eldon's farmhouse, which was untouched except for the broken plywood on 2 windows and the stains on the driveway gravel that rain would eventually wash away. I spent 3 more weeks on the farm. We all did. The infrastructure took time to rebuild. Power, communications, supply chains. Simone and I monitored the radio together every evening, tracking the recovery the same way we had tracked the collapse. When cellular service returned, I called my sister. She was safe. Portland had barely been touched. I called Angie. She answered. Her voice was hoarse and flat and emptied out. She had not left the center for 9 days. She had dispatched emergency services through the worst of it, sitting in that chair, wearing that headset, staying on the line. She told me she was glad I made it. I told her the same. Neither of us said much else. There was not much else to say. She had given me her minutes, and I had spent them staying alive, and the debt between us was the kind that cannot be repaid, because repayment would diminish what the gift was. I never went back to dispatch. I think about the 37 calls every night before sleep. I do not know if I will ever stop.